Hi there, fellow crafters. This is Mia from Paperholic Stamper. Before we start our coloring session using watercolors, specifically Stampin' Up! Inks or ink pads, let me first show you the difference between using Stazon and Memento or any water-based inks prior to coloring a stamped image. We all know that Stazon is alcohol-based ink, and Memento or any of our ink pads are all water-based. So the outcome that we want to achieve will very much be based on the type of ink for the outline that we need to use. So let me show you how. Today, we will be using Stampin' Up's current product code Apple Harvest. So I have here two watercolor papers, both 300 GSM in thickness and 100% cotton. I am picking this apple here for our example. On the left, I have the Sahara Sand, which we all know is water-based, and on the right, Stazon. So to achieve a very light impression, stamp first the image on your scrap paper, like so. Then the second impression onto your watercolor paper. You can use any ink pad for your faint outline. It doesn't have to be Sahara Sand. That's just my choice. Some demonstrators use basic gray, which is also good. Then you may ask, why do we need a faint outline? The answer to that is if you want your final image to look realistic or lifelike, then this is the way to go. It's also known as the no-line watercoloring technique. So now we're moving on with Stazon. I'm using black. This is alcohol-based as mentioned, and I would use this if I want the outlines to be bold or obvious or distinct. It is also known as the line and wash coloring technique. You can clearly see the difference here. The left side, we used Sahara Sand, water-based, and on the right, we used Stazon, alcohol-based. The Stazon is dark, obvious and distinct, and the Sahara, very light. Now let's start watercoloring. So for the bodies of the apples, I will be using three colors: Real Red, Cherry Cobbler, and Daffodil Delight. So our first color layer would be yellow. This is Daffodil Delight. I'm using a number 6 round brush. You can use number 4. It's all about timing. Check if the image is still wet or glistening, not too wet, and that is your cue for the application of your color. This is also known as the wet on wet technique. So our first color layer is done. I'll let it dry. And we will be doing the same for the image where we used Stazon. Same method. Wet the image first. I know some of you are thinking, what if we used a black Memento instead of the black Stazon? The answer is no, it won't work. The black ink will just fade and bleed, and you will have a very muddy outcome. Because remember, Memento is water-based, and if you introduce liquid to it, it will just melt or get activated again. So the Sahara Sand outline with the yellow watercolor is now dry. So we are ready for our second layer of color. I'm using real red this time. So get your fresh ink, wash your brush, wet it. Now mix the ink on your palette. You are after a very, very creamy consistency here. Starting from the top, glide your brush downwards. And just probably feel like a quarter of the apple. Now clean your brush, dry it, and then try to pull in the color from the left going to the right. And since the paper is wet, the color or the pigment will just naturally travel towards the right. And just guide it through with your brush. I would purposely leave some yellow areas just for interest or to show a little reflection. I hope you can see it. Now I'm doing the same for the Stazon outline. That's it. Let it dry. Set it aside. Now we're back to Sahara Sand outline. I'm doing the right part of the apple. Same method as we did before. Dark pigment on the right from top to bottom. And then with a clean brush, not too dry, glide it through going to the right and pick up little pigments from it. You can do your little touch-ups in the areas which you think might need some a bit of red. So that's the overall look. I think I'm happy with that. Okay, let's move on to the Stazon again and do the same thing on the right of the apple. Didn't you find that so easy? So this is the Stazon one. Let's compare apples with apples. So the left one is the Sahara Sand outline, and on the right is the Stazon. With the Sahara Sand, you can see that with the application of water, it just faded or dissolved the Sahara Sand outline. And with the Stazon, since it's alcohol based, it's permanent, so it stays the same. Now let's move on with cherry cobbler. I'm using cherry cobbler as our third layer here, but mostly on the sides of the apples, just to give it a bit of shadow and little streaks of lines onto the apple. Now let it dry and we go on to the next apple that stays on outline. Doing the same method as with the Sahara one. We use the cherry cobbler to darken the sides of the apple. And since the outline is very distinct or obvious, use that as a guide, especially for putting in the shadows. And using the tip of your brush, you can do little lines on the surface. So we are literally comparing an apple with another apple. Which one do you prefer? I like both. It Each one has its own special look. The left one, or the Sahara Sand outline, looks more realistic than the Stazon one, but I think they're equally good. So I hope you learned a thing or two from me today. And if you have any questions, feel free to message me anytime. Take care. Bye.